Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the evening. I'm Joe Doolittle.
And good morning, in case it's that time of day to you. This is Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story,
Sharing the human experience.
which is the way we folks generally share experiences by telling stories. Mm-hmm. And
Let me tell you about the traffic on the way here.
yeah, right. Well, we've had a lot of stories, and for the next hour, we have a guest teller, and Kate and I are going to be doing some reflections on storytelling and the use of storytelling in various places. One place we were recently was at a big storytelling conference.
Yes.
Over at the University of Massachusetts, called Sharing the Fire.
Yes, it's put on every year for 30-some years by the League for the Advancement of New England Storytelling, called Lanes.
Called Lanes.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful gathering of folks with workshops and some keynotes that really talked about the value and the power of storytelling to teach and heal and bring people into community.
And there were also some stellar performances.
There were. And so if you want to know more about that organization, it's lanes.org, and it's on the web, and it's a good reference point along with our website for finding out more about storytelling as an art form, as a method in teaching and healing and other organizations.
Creating community.
Creating community, which is kind of what happens. I sometimes think that we create community even though we're not thinking about creating community because of the just interconnectedness of all of us.
Well, once you hear someone's story, you can no longer dismiss them as a member of that other unspeakable group that you would never have anything in common with. You know, storytelling has been used in the reconciliation process in Northern Ireland, that they brought together people whose families had both been devastated by the terrorism, and your father got kneecapped, my uncle got kneecapped. And once they heard about each other's sufferings that was so similar to their own, they could no longer just hate them as the wrong religion or the wrong territory or members of the wrong territory.
You know, as you were telling that little story, I was reminded of just this past Sunday at Proctor's. We hosted a program from Children at the Well, which we've had the interfaith storytelling for Youth for Understanding on. And what happens is that young storytellers grow up, and the presentation dealt with a film which is called
Stepping Toward the Lion.
Thank you, Kate.
By John Lydon, a former member of Children at the Well.
And it involves the whole community of these young people in storytelling, but it also involves a young Muslim who had difficulty with bullying and other kinds of just tension as he went from the Islamic school to the public school. And the story is just wonderful. And what was especially nice for us was that some of these young people who we met in high school when they were just...
Well, before they hit their growth spurt, some of them started when they were in 6th grade.
And two of them are over 6'2". And that
Sarah might be taller than me too.
Right. So it was, and they were poised after the film. They were talking about story and life, and they're on to wonderful things in graduate school. It was just great.
And they each said their lives had been significantly changed by the experience of learning to tell stories from their own traditions with other teenage storytellers, each from their own traditions. And they found that they had a lot in common, despite their differences. And they have remained friends.
And I think they will remain friends
Yes.
for a long time. And for those of you out there who have the value of a friend from high school as you're now an adult, you know how wonderfully supportive those kinds of relationships can be.
So you can find out more about them at their website, childrenatthewell.org, and we'll be telling about an upcoming program at the beginning of May that
Right.
they'll be producing.
Later in the program.
Yes.
We've talked about story a lot, in the early part of the show, and maybe we ought to talk about a storyteller.
Yes. Now, who should that be? Let
I'm
me think.
wondering.
The woman at the end of the table
Yes,
who was laughing gently?
This,
Maybe
that would be good. Bonnie Mion is here, and we know Bonnie from our local story circle of the Capital District. We've had the benefit of having you at our monthly sessions and listening to your stories
And at Telebration.
and watching you dance.
And at Wordplays.
Just wonderful, just wonderful. Welcome, Bonnie.
Well, welcome. Good morning.
Just give us a little bit, where's home for you?
I live in Greene County, in the north part of Greene County.
North Powder, Greene County. That means
Called New Baltimore.
New Baltimore.
Yes.
New Baltimore. The Shady Grove Marina. Is that
Right around the corner.
right around the corner, right? Wonderful.
Do they have a bar, Joe?
Yes, they do.
Okay, just a guess.
But I've only been in it 3 times. It's a long drive from my house, but it's a great little village. It's just a wonderful little village tucked away on the river. That's the Hudson River, by the way. So that must be fun.
It is. It's great.
And when you were, did you grow up in Greene County, or are you from?
No. I'm from Long Island originally.
Island.
I came up here like 20 years ago.
When you were still a child. When you look back a little bit, when did you kind of realize that you were a storyteller or you were going to become a storyteller? When did that happen for you?
About 2 years ago. I was talking with my mother last night, and she said, "You really have come full circle." When I was in college finishing up, I had decided that I wanted to act in plays that would in some way help the world. I have spent the last 3 decades of my life exploring story in all of its different venues. The way that we're told stories, the stories we tell ourselves, the way the world tells us stories. I've come to a very deep and thorough understanding of how that shapes our lives and our thinking. In 2010, I joined Toastmasters and gained a lot of confidence. The next year, I felt ready. I had always known about storytelling. My mother was an elementary school librarian. We went to a lot of storytelling events, even when I moved up here. So I knew about the community and what was going on. And it just felt right I was ready to start telling the stories that I thought were important and that I thought people needed to hear. And it's been a process which has been very fun, because I had never written a story until a couple of years ago.
Fun.
But you've come up with some humdingers.
I've had so much fun with it.
Well, we've had fun listening to you.
But you also have another artistic background that I think you might mention.
I have been a dancer since I was about as high as this table. I was 5 years old. I know I started dancing, and I've danced my whole life. I am an Egyptian-style belly dancer and a Hawaiian hula dancer. Those are really 2 of my passions, and they work really beautifully well, adding storytelling to them. So I have programs where it's storytelling and a little dance, or dance with a little storytelling.
Well, that's true. I know that at last year's celebration, you shared a Hawaiian story and danced, and I must say that whenever I see anybody hula dancing, it's hard to focus on the story for me, but it was beautiful and very well done. That the hands of the hula dancer always tell a story in addition to the story that you told, and that is something. Some of us couldn't do that, you know.
Right.
I mean,
And I love the way you did it at Celebration, because first you told the story and then you did the dance. And I could follow along. I go, oh, we're at that part.
yeah.
And because I think you also used a few of those gestures while you were telling to give us a little hints. And so it was so well done. So the two art forms you interwove them so well.
Yes, I'm very much enjoying adding my old passion and my forever passion with this new storytelling passion. I love the blending them together. I'm really having so much fun with that because I feel it's so much richer.
Do you tell stories for some of us tell stories more for kids or more for adults, or do you feel comfortable with many kinds of audiences? What
I
works
can
best?
tell for either and or. I probably tend to slide more towards adults, but I do children too.
Yeah, she did a wonderful program at the Albany Institute of History and Art on Egyptian stories, because they have they had a new mummy exhibition. And as part of that, Bonnie did a program.
Oh, really? That must have been
dancing
interesting. I
and
missed that.
stories.
Wow.
So yes,
That's great.
But and speaking of stories, would you tell us a story now, Bonnie?
Oh, I'd be so happy to.
Oh,
This
great.
was the very first story that I ever wrote and told. When I grew up, my grandmother had always told us about her father. His name was Nathaniel Schmidt. Now, he had gone on this fantastic adventure with some of his colleagues, and they were Jesse Wrench, Alfred T. Olmsted, and Benson Brush Charles. He was a biblical scholar and a Baptist minister. I decided that the story didn't really completely make sense. There were a lot of missing details. Finally, in 2011, I decided to start researching this event. It took me about 2 years and approximately hundreds of hours of research, combing through archives, books, manuals, personal letters, till I finally pulled it all together. This was the story that I wrote that I thought would best explain what happened on that particular trip. The year was 1904. I was a junior at college at Cornell University. I was 22 years old. I and my cousin Albert, who was a little bit older, a graduate student, and our friend Benson, all went to Jerusalem and the Holy Lands for an entire year. We went with our professor, Nathaniel Schmidt. He was a minister, too. He looked the part with his dark brown beard and mustache. That man could enthrall any crowd. You should have seen the classrooms. They were packed. Standing room only. People were sitting in the windowsills. The public even showed up at these classes. He was brilliant. He knew everything. He was a walking encyclopedia of ancient history, modern history, the Bible, languages, anything to do with the Near East, which helped us greatly many times during our trip. But today, I wanted to tell you about a particular adventure we went on in February of 1905 that year. We had decided to go to the Dead Sea. Now, this is a sea that's between Jordan and Israel, present day. Everyone had told us it was not a good idea to go. It was just dangerous. Our other research colleagues had told us from the other institutes, friends, family, and the travel guides. My favorite was Baedeker's Handbook for Travelers. In that book, he says, the lands between the cultivated areas and the desert proper are filled with marauders who may try to attack you. In the event that this occurs, it is not advisable to kill one of the Arabs, as the entire tribe will seek revenge. We knew it was dangerous, but we had a plan. We were going to rent a boat on the Dead Sea. There were only about 2 of them available. If we saw any trouble, we would just push off into the sea. We would take turns, each of us, 2 hours through the night to keep a lookout. We went to the Dead Sea. We rented a 16-foot rowboat, which the Prof called the Dagmar, after his charming little daughter. The boat had to have in it all of the food and water, it was a salt sea, that we needed for 4 men for 3 weeks. Plus our camping materials, supplies, cookware, our blankets. We needed our survey equipment. We had cameras. We had 2 cameras and a tripod. All of our work paraphernalia, reference books, sketchbooks, notebooks, maps. The boat was full. We didn't even have room for a change of clothes. We were going to wear what we had on our backs right now. That's what we'd be sleeping into. But we started our trip. It was a glorious adventure. We first went to the thermal hot springs where Cleopatra and King Herod had bathed. We explored uncharted lands of the Bible. We climbed cliffs and went into caves and climbed right up through the middle of the waterfalls at the great river Arnon. Then, one day, it was my turn to watch the boat, and the others walked down a piece of beach. I missed that day. I'm an archaeologist now. They found Roman ruins of an aqueduct, a sugar mill, and a couple of houses. They were so thrilled, taking photographs and surveying it, making notes, until they noticed that up high on the cliff above them was an Arab looking down at them. Now, of course, they thought, as they saw past the Arab, there was an encampment. This was the kind of savage marauders that they had been warned about might try to kill us. They grabbed all their equipment, ran back to the beach. We threw everything into the boat. But it was the exact wrong time and the wrong location to be getting into the water. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The skies were darkening. A storm was starting to roll in from the northwest. The waves and the winds were coming in, pushing our boat towards the south, and exactly at our south was the Licon Peninsula. Now, the Licon Peninsula is this enormous wall, about 500 feet high, cliff that runs perpendicular into the water and juts out into the Dead Sea for about 5-6 miles. We had nowhere to go. We couldn't go north, we couldn't go south. We had to cross the sea in a storm in the night. And on top of that, our boat was leaking. The day before, the Dagmar had sprung leaks. We were trying desperately to melt some of the asphalt on the beach to fix the holes, but it didn't work. We had to cross the sea because we looked behind us and we saw on that piece of beach we had just been the torchlights of some of the Arabs as they were slowly moving their way up and down the beach. They were obviously looking for us, not suspecting we were out in the sea. We were furiously paddling to keep from being crashed into the cliff, and we made it. It took us 8 hours, bailing water out of the boat, pushing our way towards the western shore. How we got there is beyond me. The prof had an uncanny sense of direction in the pitch dark of night, but we got to the western shore, only to see that there were lights of another camp. We rode another mile or so north to find another encampment. With the last shreds of our strength, we rode yet further until we found an opening where a riverbed was between the cliffs. Not the most ideal place to camp, but we were exhausted. We were wet. It was February. We had no dry clothes to change into. We were hungry. We crashed, but still had to stay post for the night. Wow, how glad we were by the time the morning came and the sun had come up. We started to gather together our supplies for a breakfast when we saw there was an Arab coming over the beach. He didn't look that scary. He had a smile on his face, and the prof, being the best with dialects of us all, he spoke with them, and the man told us that he was from the Rashidi tribe that lived in Ein Gedi. But the prof noticed that the man took off to the south when he surmised that Ein Gedi was up to the north. We didn't pay much attention to it as we were hungry and making our breakfast until about an hour later. 21 swarming men came charging at us over the sand and the rocks. They barely had any clothing on, and each one of them had a knife, a gun, a pistol, a sword, a spear in their hand. We grabbed our things and threw them into the Dagmar, pushed off into the water, but unfortunately it was a bit shallow right there. And the war party came in, crashing at the water at us, grabbed hold of the boat, and pulled us back at gunpoint, taking our belongings out of the boat. Well, of course, we thought this was the end of our days, until the prof did something that startled even us. He put his hand on his hip and he said, "Oh, I can see that you are not from the Rashidi tribe that you say you are, and you do not live in Ein Gedi, the village. But you are the Jahalin tribe, and you live in Sefasif. It is beyond that precipice, past a large rock encampment. And then he went on to describe their camp. Well, you should have seen those Bedouin step back, and they lowered all of their weapons. Who was this white man who knew not only their language but could speak their dialect perfectly? Who knew who they were, where they lived, and could detail their hideout? Well, the prof continued to talk. And as he did so, he slowly maneuvered himself back to the campfire. He told them about other things he knew about the lands where they lived around the Dead Sea. He told them about the thermal hot springs and me pretending to be Cleopatra in the hot thermal waters. And he told us, and he told them about places that we hadn't even been yet. The great salt pillar that's called Lot's Wife. The waterfalls that we went up through in the River Arnon. As he did so, the men sat down, one at a time, around that campfire to listen to the prof. Then they teased us about our funny clothes, and truth, we were a pretty bedraggled rot by that point. Our clothes had been so badly ripped and tattered on the sharp rocks that we had done all our adventuring and climbing. We hadn't hardly a whole piece of cloth between the four of us. The prof laughed heartily, and we took our cue. We laughed too. And then the leader of the tribe said, "You are a master." And the tribesmen started to salute the prof. They thought he was a great man. And in truth, he was a great man. They said, "You can leave now. We won't harm you." We were so excited. Yes, finally. But no, not the prof. He put up his hand and said, "Oh, but we are with friends, and we are getting to have new acquaintances. We are enjoying ourselves. We will stay a little while longer." He didn't want to give the impression that we were anxious to leave or anything. He didn't think it would look right. A while later, the tribesmen did put our food and our belongings, well, minus some sugar and some lemons, back in our boat. We got back in the Dagmar, the prof sitting tall and erect at the stern, rudder in hand, and we were all waving and smiling goodbye. And I thought, they don't look so much like savages. Why, they look like friends. I never saw the Bedouin the same way ever again. I don't imagine that they saw white men quite the same either again. I always thought that there wasn't a person there that day whose life wasn't in some way forever changed. I know mine was.
Oof.
Lovely.
Lovely.
Now you have some photos to share with us?
Yes, I do. This, of course, is Nathaniel Schmidt.
Ah.
It was a little bit younger in this photo, but this is the best one that I've got that we dug up from the archives.
And that being your great-grandfather.
This
Just in
being
case.
my great-grandfather,
Yeah. Just in
yes,
case.
yes, of course. And this is to give you a sense of the Arnon, which has a tremendous amount of biblical significance too. The walls and the height of the ravine where this water came down.
Yeah.
And this is an old picture. You can see a boat, a rowboat too, kind of making its way up. And they climbed these cliffs. I wanted to show you two more pictures. This one gives you a sense of the sides of the Dead Sea. You can see the scale of it. That little teeny mark there is a boat, is a rowboat next to the enormous cliffs around the Dead Sea. And beneath it is a picture from a book called The Land of Moab by an earlier explorer called Tristram. I love this one because this is a drawing of a siege that happened almost exactly in the location where Nathaniel Schmidt and his party of students were captured. It's a wonderful picture of the Bedouin, and you could see their costuming or lack of, which were very common ways that tribesmen fought in that time period.
And this would have been somewhere around 1904, 05, something like that?
Yes, yes. Well, that picture was drawn around 1875, 74. But things had not changed a great deal.
So that the story capture is really a story about how Story got you freed from capture.
Yes.
Isn't that a
Well,
that's
it's sort of creating a community between the two sides.
Yeah.
Well, it's the power of story, for sure.
And your great-grandfather obviously knew a lot about the turf and the people there, and used that to the advantage of the group to just turn the whole situation around. I mean,
Yes.
talk about the ultimate schmoozer, man. I tell ya,
Yes.
even on a good day, I couldn't get away with that, Kate.
Well, right, but he proved that he wasn't an outsider, that he miraculously knew about them and clearly was interested in them.
I think he created what you were talking about before, a sense of bonding. We are all humans together. And he connected with them through the story and the story of their lands that they would have known about and they would have been impressed by. And he connected with them as people, not as the savages that they were told that they were.
Or as items to be studied for his research.
Right.
Lesser items.
Yes. He connected.
This was 10 or 12 years before Lawrence of Arabia and all the revolt by the same people against the Turkish Empire, because that was who was in control politically there at the time.
Yes.
And the pictures look remarkably like our American West, too, in the landscape of the hard rocks and the tough water, you know.
And traveling by water. Water was the first highway.
Yeah. Well, these were very uncharted lands. I mean, it was sort of the equivalent of when people went to the West. Westerners went to the West. I mean,
Well, let's take a little break and talk about the coming events, and then we get back for another story.
okay.
So, the first coming event that I know about is on Sunday, May 4th. It's Children at the Well presents an afternoon of storytelling from many traditions with a musical interlude. This is at St. Paul's Episcopal Church on 3rd Street in Troy. And the church itself has Tiffany windows.
Yes, it does.
And fabulous woodwork. So please join us for the performance or a vegetarian potluck supper that follows it. So for more information, once again, their website is childrenatthewell.org. Then, oh, here I am.
Here you are.
On First Tuesday, Tales and Stuff, a new open mic for storytelling, music, and the spoken word on the first Tuesday of May, May 6th, 7 to 9. I'll be the featured performer telling about Julia Child, Cook, and Nifty Wench.
And that's in Schenectady's Stockade at Arthur's Market, right around the corner, or right at the statue of Lawrence the Indian. And it's a just renovated spot that's very historic in its feel and very open and airy. It's a great place for conversation, a little light food, and good stories and other kind of entertainment. So we encourage you to come to hear Kate spin her stories of Julia Child, and we have arranged a special Julia Child cake.
Yes, the Reine de Saba, the Queen of Sheba cake.
Yes.
Sort of. We're back to the Middle East again.
And
it's a chocolate cake with a molten center. Oh,
it's the whole experience is going to be just great. So please follow up, and no need for a reservation. Just show up.
yes. Then the following week on Wednesday, May 14th, is the monthly Saratoga Storytelling Open Mic. This month it's at Cafe Lena on Phila Street, and the featured teller will be Barbara McCarthy, who was born in Ireland and still has that luscious Irish accent.
She's from County Clare, don't you?
Yes, yes, near Limerick. Yes, indeed. So that's a treat.
And I'm on a food kick today. You know,
Did you have breakfast?
I did have breakfast, but Cafe Lena is just above Hattie's Chicken House, Chicken Shack. So if you've not been in Hattie's Chicken Shack, it's a famous Saratoga landmark and restaurant. And just across the street is one of the finest Thai restaurants with great sushi, and that's like Sushi Alley now. There's another one right up the street, and then there's a great little pub on the corner. So it's a great place to come and have a little bit of supper, and then come and have coffee and a cookie at Cafe Lena's and listen to stories.
Yes. And then our next Story Circle meeting will be right here at the Colonie Town Library on Tuesday, May 20th, starting at 6:30 for sharing stories, which could be under development. Yeah, stories under development, not underdeveloped. But you know, it's a place to try out a new story, and you can get feedback or not as you wish.
Right, and some of our programs, like Cafe Lena and stuff, are a little bit more, I would say, formal. But the Story Circle gatherings are a good way to just meet stories, meet storytellers, and experience kind of what it's like. So think about it as an introduction to storytelling if you're interested in being new.
And listeners are always welcome.
That's true.
The people actually that storytellers love best are listeners, as well as other storytellers.
Without listeners, there's no story.
You're kind of considered a little bit crazy that you're talking to nobody at all. So, yes, we love listeners. And then, if you'd like more stories between this storytelling program on your local public access station, you can go to our website, storycircle@proctors.org, and click on YouTube. And there you will see over 100 stories that have been cut mostly from these programs. And you can enjoy storytelling that way too. So that's what's coming up.
That's what's going on. And there will be programs through the summer, so continue to watch and we'll fill you in what's going on then. We are going to have summer. We might not have had spring happen quite yet, but I'm sure that's going to happen, and then we're going to have summer.
Spring is here. I've seen skateboarders. I've seen
robins. I've seen robins.
I've seen my little tiny snowdrops. They were up in March. Granted, it was March 30th that I looked for them and found them, but no, spring is the ice shelf, or the snowbanks are almost all gone. So it's spring. It's spring.
Okay.
And if it does that four-letter S word again.
Don't even say it.
Right.
Don't even say it.
It's so warm that it'll just go away the next day.
Thank you.
So, okay.
I
So-
like it when you're optimistic, Kate. I do.
Well, spring kind of sneaks. It's a very sneaky kind of season. That it's
This year.
yes, and then you get you have to look for your forsythia buds and the tulips and the daffodils sprouting out of the ground, and maybe then they have buds as well as leaves, and it's a slow. It's the opposite of a striptease. A slow.
Enrobement.
Yes, exactly.
Enrobement.
Of the world with flowers and leaves. And,
Couldn't happen soon enough for me, I'll tell you.
well, that's
No.
yes. Anyways, we digress.
Well, I think we can progress back to another story, and I have to ask a little bit about that. Do you remember when you first heard that story?
I heard it my whole life, actually.
Whole life, okay.
I mean, I don't remember the first time. I mean, I was young.
It's an heirloom story.
It was
just always
something my
there, yeah.
grandmother always said, but not this version.
Yeah.
It was an extremely watered down version, which was why it was so much fun to research this, because this was a much more elaborate.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
a few bullet points.
Yeah, definitely. But I think in retrospect, he might not have told her the whole story. So she was only young.
Yeah.
She was only 8, 9 years old. He might not wanted to frighten her.
So, okay. Now for your next story.
I consider myself a fairly good creative problem solver, somebody who can think out of the box. Some of you might think of yourself that way too. But something happened last year that made me question my view of myself. I'll tell you what happened. I had been reading a great deal of ancient Egyptian literature as I was preparing for a performance. This one particular story really caught my attention. This is how it went. It's ancient Egypt. King Sneferu is wandering around the palace one day. He is bored. More than that, he's in a glum mood. His usual entertainments are just not lightening his spirit. The king goes to his closest advisor, who also happens to be the chief scribe and the court magician, to see if he's got any ideas. This is a wiser, older man. He suggests that they go for a boat ride. It will do you good. You'll be out in the fresh air, the sunshine. You'll hear the oars splashing in the water. You'll see the birds diving down for the fish, the green grasses, the flowers of the gardens around the lake. So that's what they do. 20 young women are gathered from the harem, and they have on their nicest beaded collars, earrings, and headbands on. They're rowing and singing along. The king is feeling better. It's working. Then the women stop rowing and singing along. What's happening? The king says. The women explained to him that the woman who was the lead stroke in the boat had stopped rowing because she had accidentally dropped her necklace in the lake. I'll get you another, the king offered. I'd prefer my own, the young woman dared to say. This particular necklace had on it her sacred amulet. She had had this since childhood. She wanted that one back. Fortunately, the king was in a good mood. He looked upon his advisor once again to see if he had a remedy for the situation. Now, this is where I asked myself, what would I have done if I were the advisor? Well, immediately I thought, I see this story as a metaphor. It's describing how sometimes in the process of living, we lose a part of ourselves and how we go about getting that part back. But then I realized that I came to this conclusion because I have about 30 years of background and training in psychotherapy and Jungian astrology. What if you didn't have exactly my specific background and training? How would you answer this question? That led me to ask a friend of mine at the time who had gone to FIT for fashion design. She said, the king and the advisor need to go shopping with the women, bring them to Kohl's clothing store, get them some new dresses, and tell the women not to worry about the necklace. Oh, I thought to myself, I never would have come up with that conclusion. That made me think I needed to ask another friend who happened to be an engineer. He said, the king needs to throw a party, a big festival, invite everyone from the kingdom. They will come, they'll be given bamboo straws. Of course, the water in the lake is pure and clean. One at a time, they drink out of it until the lake is drained. The woman gets back her amulet, plus all the other items that have been lost over the time would be returned to their rightful owners. The feed stream for the lake would be released, and it filled back up again. Nope, I would not have come up with that solution either. I asked somebody else. She said, the king needs to have a diving contest. The person who retrieves the item gets a special prize. I hadn't thought of that one either. I asked other people and realized all of the different ways my thinking had truly been in a box. Since then, I've made a very deliberate point to approach new alternatives to handling life's problems, everyday ones that come along. And I have to say, it's helped a lot. With this in mind, I'd like to invite you to step outside your usual framework of solving life's challenges. You never know what solutions you might find.
Oh, fun, fun, fun.
All inspired by an ancient Egyptian story.
Yes.
And in the ancient Egyptian story, does it have a different ending, or
Yes, it does.
Oh.
Yes, it does.
Okay. And I'll just leave it that way, because our viewers should be curious about what the real ending of the story might be. That's good.
I went with the diving solution. I thought that was
all right.
That was,
Well,
or the magician, the advisor, beloved, could he magic it back up?
Yes, yes. I mean, do you want to keep it a secret, or do you want me to tell you what the magician did?
Whatever you
prefer. It's I think we do have time, and I am curious, and I suppose our viewers are curious. So maybe we ought to have the ending.
All right. I won't keep you on the hook too long. The magician, well, you have to understand, this was written 5,000 years ago. the person who told the story was a storyteller. One of the original stories ever recorded, actually. Being a storyteller, he solved it in a particularly storytelling fashion. The magician opened up his book of magic spells, found one, did his magic, and lifted half the body of water up, put it on the other half of the body, retrieved the amulet, did some more spells, and put the water back again.
Just like that.
Just like that. But that was a solution of a storyteller.
Well, now you know. There's physics, and then there's storytellers. You know, I think that's the only way to deal with that. And I kind of like that ending. And then the concubine of the king, the wife of the king, she got her amulet back. She was happy, and she didn't, of course, she didn't get to go to Kohl's.
But then again, there wasn't Kohl's back
Oh,
then.
okay.
I love the idea of putting half of the volume of
Water.
just stay there and you know the Moses and
Right.
dividing, you know, that seems a lot easier than taking half. I don't know. I'm in a silly mood.
Well, it's kind of the same.
I'm overanalyzing it.
It's the same tradition, you know, the Egyptians' tradition of just picking up the water, the larger.
Yeah.
So wonderful! Thank you so much. Thank
You're
you so much.
welcome.
And thank you. In case you haven't noticed, we have a new decor for the Egyptian story. We have the lamp and the cape and the rainbow tablecloth. So you know you have really dressed the whole setup today. Bonnie, really.
But these are part of. I imagine you dance. With the veil?
I have about 30
Right.
different veils that I use for dancing, and they come in wonderfully well for covering tabletops or traveling,
Yep.
wearing over anything. You could use it as a beach wrap if need be.
Yep.
And this you have worn,
This is
or not?
This is a hip scarf. I have worn this dancing. I have also probably 50 of hip scarves. I put this because in the tradition of using hip scarves really starts from ancient Egypt times and that part of the world, North Africa as well. The women, you'll see, have these little representatives of coins on them. They would dance and coins would be thrown at them and they'd sew them onto their clothing because they didn't have good bank accounts then, and there weren't such things as banks. You had to really wear what you were.
Right. In India, I think there's a tradition of you wear your gold bracelets. That's your fortune or your dowry.
Yes. So the women would dance and get the money for their dowry. There's many stories from that time and from the history of dance, and I like to tell them as well too.
Yeah, but of course, dancing that you shimmy and you clink isn't quite the right word.
They jingle.
Jingle. I like jingle. And
That's
so
like
it adds some percussion.
That's like a
Absolutely.
little castanet.
Or they're
Zills.
Yes, zills. They're like two tiny metal cymbals that you put on your fingers. I've had a few belly dancing lessons. I'm not.
Well, the women were very talented. They didn't have tape players. They had to be their own music and dance at the same time. And if they were lucky, they had a friend who came along and did some drumming. But the zills provided a lot of musicality too.
Well,
people don't know that the ancient Egyptians danced all the time.
is that right? Somehow
Yes.
we don't have that.
We
don't know a lot about them.
Well, but I say ancient Egyptians, and I see them, flat on a frieze, and obviously they're static.
Oh, yeah, but there's many papyri and carvings on temple walls of women dancing, and women were the dancers primarily. Some men were too later on in the Greco-Roman period, but they loved to dance and party and sing. They were very lively group, but people don't necessarily know that about the ancient Egyptians.
Right, and was it for entertainment, or was it any part of it their religion practices?
Everything. Okay. For entertainment, for religion. They would dance and sing and play music while they were chafing wheat in the fields.
Well, there you go.
To entertain them and sing.
Right, make the time pass, and yeah, cool. You've brought us to the Middle East in a way that no one has
Right,
before on this show. And,
That's true. That's true.
Given us tablecloth envy and.
And kind of, you know, the other lesson for folks or takeaway is that you've actually mined your family's stories. You know, you've harvested things that were not only kind of in the closet, but they've been in the hearts of the family, so to speak, and you brought them out and shared them, and they build a richness to not only your family, but to the setting. To think that there were students from Cornell studying in the Middle East in the early 1900s, that a faculty person would take a group of young people over to the Middle East.
Talk about a field trip.
Talk about a field trip. It took a year, and it took half the time was just going there and back, you know? And then that he would then take them to a remote place to experience the Dead Sea, and, you know...
The land of the Bible stories.
Yes.
Now,
And had the chutzpah to do that.
Well,
or lack of judgment. Or
yes, I was going to say you could go either way on that thing. Now, this is a little bit of a digression, but do you tell biblical stories as well? Do you like?
Because of my going so in depth, and I've read probably 100 books and more likely 1,000 articles related to the Bible and the Dead Sea, and I've taken 4 courses in the Bible. I joined a Bible study class at the local church, and I had never picked up the Bible before this point. So it has brought me this incredible richness about our culture and religion, and that now I know about, and I weave it in, and I can use it in the stories. So now I've been just so fascinated with some of the adventurers and some of the happenings. He went to Petra also, which is very ancient, and had this whole adventure there. And he was looking for where originally it was thought that Moses had maybe taken the tribes, and they found the Bedouin. And there were other stories and episodes that I have put together there too.
Well, our time has come to an end. So we'd like to thank you, Bonnie Mion of New Baltimore, for joining us today.
And we'd like to thank you for watching and listening, and we hope to see you around this table or other tables listening and telling stories.
Thank you for having me.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,